This is Jay Dyer from Jay's Analysis. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. Esoteric Hollywood is where I deconstruct the biggest films in an unparalleled way, from the classics of the silver screen to today's blockbusters. Learn to watch film with new eyes as we enter Esoteric Hollywood. I wonder if I could figure out how it was that Betamax moved to VHS. Why did it go in this way? What happened to Betamax? What do I do with all my Betamax videos and my laser discs? Well, ponder whether or not Aristotle and his four causes can make sense of my Spy Who Loved Me VHS tape here. Jay Dyer from Jay's Analysis. Listen, I want to talk about the possibility of a simple way to understand Aristotle's teaching of the four causes. And this is what we're going to do this week at Jay's Analysis. If you're a subscriber or if you follow my work, we're going to look at Aristotle and we're going to get pretty in-depth. But one of the main features of Aristotle's philosophy here in this brief video, which is a kind of introductory salvo to the full 2 hours, is the four causes, how to understand Aristotle's metaphysics and the four causes. So if we were to take my VHS video of The Spy Who Loved Me from the earliest days of VHS post Betamax, and we were to ask the question, how did this thing come to be, or how would Aristotle describe this thing coming to be? Was Aristotle a fan of Roger Moore? If he were alive, would he be? Probably not, but that's okay. So the first thing that we want to think about is that what Aristotle calls a material cause. So step one is going to be the material cause. And for Aristotle, the causes don't have the same meaning that they do in the way that we think about causes post-scientific enlightenment, post-scientific revolution, right? So for him, they just mean stages of being and how they unify an object over time. So the central question of Aristotle's philosophy, as well as much of philosophy in the history of the West, is going to be the question of identity over time, right? So when we talk about the material cause, what we mean here is the matter that makes up the object. So the material cause of this Spy Who Loved Me VHS is obviously plastic, right? The whole thing is made of plastic, except for perhaps the outer casing, which is old school CBS Fox cardboard. So from there, we Aristotle would say that there's the elements that make up this thing that give it its identity over time. One of those elements is going to be the fact that it's made from some form of matter, some materia, some form of matter. Now the next cause, the next stage of being for this specific object that we're going to try to understand how it has identity, we're going to call this the formal cause. What does this mean, the formal cause of an object? Well, every object that exists that has some kind of identity has a form. Right? And so this means its lineaments, its dimensions, its shape, right? This is what we mean by form. And so the formal cause is the shape of the object, the squareness, the VHS-ness. No, I'm joking. The VHS aspects of my Spy Who Loved Me will actually be part of the totality definition of what this object is for Aristotle. So the formal, however, is that it's impressed, right? So some Asian dude at the plant was impressing the plastic, probably back in this day, with some sort of form so that it had its gigantic rectangular black features so that it could fit into your VHS, right? That's the formal cause of the object, and every object is going to have these aspects in some degree, except for natural objects. Natural objects will not necessarily have an artificial human agent as their cause, right? So humans are not causing trees and so forth, unless you want to talk about GMOs. That might be different now. But so the next would be the efficient cause, right? So this is the agent, right? And this is, we mentioned, the agent behind impressing this object with form. We mentioned before the Asian dude at the plant who was pulling the levers and stamping the VHS with its shape and with its form and with its various parts that make it up, right? So that it is able to get caught up in the VHS player and spin the tape everywhere, and you have to use a pencil or something to get it all straightened out. So that is the efficient agent cause of this object. And the final cause in the Greek is the telos for Aristotle. What is telos? Telos just means the purpose. What is the VHS made for? Well, it's made for you to watch Roger Moore episodes of Sean Connery, right, on your VHS player. So the whole purpose of the object is wrapped up in its identity over time. It helps to explain or give meaning to that object. So if you like this video, this is the basic 4 causes and explanations of how objects in the world have identity over time according to Aristotle. Then you're going to want to watch the full 2-hour discussion that we do at Jay's Analysis this week. Thank you for listening. Also, you can get my book, Esoteric Hollywood, Sex, Cults, and Symbols in Film, signed copies from me at my website, jaysanalysis.com. Welcome to another episode of Jay's Analysis, and we're going to do the next philosophy talk, which is Aristotle. So if you saw the brief little salvo that I did with the 4 causes, that'll function, I guess, as the introduction here. So that's the beginning of metaphysics for Aristotle in terms of understanding his metaphysics. And that's where we're going to start today, is with the metaphysics. We're also going to talk about some of the ethics and some of the epistemology and the aesthetics as well. But it all kind of goes together. So we're not going to spend a whole lot of time like on the poetics or biology or whatever. We're going to do an introduction to the metaphysics, and it'll function as a kind of an overview. But at the same time, what I always try to do is not just be basic with overview. If you are well read in Aristotle, hopefully there'll be some new information and relevant information, some insights that you may not have heard before. So that'll all be a package deal. And we're going to be using the Richard McKeon. So I have read Aristotle, for those that will come along and say that I don't know what I'm talking about. I haven't read Aristotle. So the McKeon Basic Works of Aristotle is a good one. That's the one I use. And a couple recommended books. We won't really go into the polity or the polis in Aristotle's view, maybe a little bit. But if you do, for example, want to go deeper into a certain area of Aristotle, maybe his politics, because Aristotle's politics was heavily influential, especially the ideas of the American government, the branches, and the importance of the middle class. That's a big part of Aristotelian civic philosophy. If you want to get deeper into that, Oxford has a book by Richard Kraut on Aristotle, but be forewarned that this book is almost entirely virtue, politics, polis, civic duty, justice, right? So ethics and political philosophy. That's about it. There's not really a big focus on metaphysics. If you want a more comprehensive series, which I've read most of this book, The Cambridge Companion to Aristotle is very good. I recommend that one. A lot of people are critical of the Cambridge Companions because they're a selection of professors' essays. So they might be selective in only dealing with certain topics and maybe not covering the breadth that you might want. You know what I mean? I read the Plato Cambridge Companion as well, and there's, it's like, well, I don't know, maybe it's by the nature of the case, it's just has to be that way, that it's got to be limited, right? Because you're talking about, over 1,000 pages, 1,500 pages or so of collected works of Plato. So how are you going to adequately cover what's in Plato in a series of essays? It's just too vast. And, the works of Plato is about the same, or of Aristotle is about the same size. So I understand the difficulty and limitations, but yeah, the Cambridge Companions do have their flaws. But if you're not a PhD student in Aristotle, it's fine. It's going to work. And a lot of people, I get, messages from people, a lot of emails now and messages where people are interested in certain fields and certain areas. And I'm trying to put together a book list at the website, but I get at least every day or two, I get people wanting me to tell them what books to read. And I just can't answer all these emails and messages. It's just too many. But so if you watch the videos and you're regular to the material, I tend to, at least nowadays, try to recommend the books that I found helpful. And I did have, at least a couple really good graduate level Aristotle classes, and then several in undergrad as well too. So I feel like I have a good grasp on. I'm not an expert, obviously, because you could spend your whole life in either Plato or Aristotle, right? There's infinite rabbit holes to go down with all of these guys, but we're still going to get the big picture here, right? And we're going to fly above Aristotle like Plato in a Platocopter, in the form of a copter. And we're going to look down on Aristotle arrogantly, and we're going to peek in and pick out what's right, and then pick out what's wrong, and toss it away. And then in our Platocopter, we're going to fly away. Not really, because Aristotle and Plato pointing up and pointing down, right? In the famous painting of Raphael, Caravaggio, whoever it was that painted the famous painting, that shows them one pointing up, one pointing down. Really, it's just another manifestation of the dialectic. Is that, either we focus on the empirical or we focus on the theoretical and the mathematical, right? And really both of those are needed for knowledge, period. Right? And this is something that I think the Orthodox tradition talks about. This is something that we experience. We experience the reality of building a bridge on the basis of abstract mathematical formulas that in some way instantiate in the physical world. Now, we may not know all of how that goes down, or what exactly brings about the process of how immaterial invariant concepts or mathematical objects can function in a world of flux, but it happens. So there's a pragmatic element here that we could talk about by experience. We know that this is the case. We also know by experience that mathematical structures are not physical. And that's pretty easy to demonstrate, because you'll never find them anywhere, right? But nobody would be so foolish as to say that if we waged a war on the number 7, that if we just started erasing sevens across the globe, that there would no longer be the number 7, right? It's very absurd to think so. So this is where we're going to start. That's the books for people who want more information, deeper stuff. But always, you can never replace going to the originals. And this is something that's very fortunate that people do nowadays, where they want to pick a person. They're going to read about Aristotle. They're going to read about Plato. They're going to read about Thomas Aquinas. And I've seen this countless times. And they don't actually read the people themselves, right? They read 20 papers from JSTOR, or they read 20 papers in, a companion. The books are called companions because you're supposed to read the guys themselves. So you can't go read the companion and then think that that's an excuse for not reading the dudes themselves. And I understand that that's a little more of a heavy load. But, do you really want to know what you're talking about, or do you just want to repeat secondhand what a secondhand dude said? It's up to you. But I always recommend having both. So that's why there's all these books around here. I always get asked, have you read all those books? That's a really stupid question. The purpose of a library is not so that you've read every single book, right? It's for reference. Just like a library, right? In the university, the assumption is not that you go to the library to read every single book in the library. So I don't know that would even be possible. The stories about presidents that have read 40,000 books in the library, I don't believe that. I think that's a bunch of made up nonsense. Even if you are a fast reader, I read all the time, and there's, I don't know how many thousands of books here. I don't think I could read all of these. I mean, it just seems just completely out of the realm of possibility, because you got other things you got to do. And I mean, even if you were completely devoted to reading and you read, I don't know, 100, 200 pages a day, I mean, that's still going to take you, how long to read thousands of books? Anyway, it seems absurd to me, even if you're a speed reader. Now, maybe something like this room, yeah, that's possible. A few thousand, yeah, sure, you could do that. But these stories of presidents who've read 40,000 books, give me a break. So anyway, that has nothing to do with Aristotle. But of course, Aristotle and Plato were learned men. And we've done quite a bit of Plato. There's probably 15, 20 Plato talks so far. And there will be more. We still got to do the Timaeus, which is a big one. A lot of esoteric, crazy stuff in the Timaeus. We got to do the Meno. We got to do Symposium. We got to talk about the laws. I mean, there's a lot in Plato we still got to do, and we will. But I can't stand monotony. I can't stand talking about the same thing over and over and over and over and over. I mean, the Tragedy and Hope talks that we did were very difficult just because it was the same effing thing for months. And so in the same way, I've got to skip around a little bit or I'll go nuts. I can't read, Aristotle every single day for a year. I mean, you would go crazy. Plus, it's pretty dry and technical, so it'd be very difficult to do. So, let's get into the meat of Aristotle. And if you're watching this is Jay Dyer from Jay's Analysis. I'm the author of the book Esoteric Hollywood, Sex, Cults, and Symbols in Film right here, which you can get at my site for $30 inside the U.S. and for $60 outside the U.S. And you will get a signed copy directly from me. Please order the book from me. There's a lot of philosophy in it. There's a lot of geopolitics. There's a lot of esoteric stuff. There's film analysis, literature, literary theory. It all kind of ties in and how it relates to today, culture critique, all of that in relation to popular films. And so it's a good introduction, a good bridgeway into philosophy if you're new to philosophy. It's also an introductory bridge into theology. For example, there are critiques of Darwinism in the book, under the rubrics of movies. So it's definitely a unique book. Everybody agrees with that. Most people like it. I think I have about 95% positive reviews in Amazon and Goodreads and across other markets, Amazon UK and so forth. So definitely get the book if you find what I talk about interesting. And so today we will be getting into a little bit of the theology as well, because Aristotle's discussion of the unmoved move, or the first cause, quote, God, with a little g, will be very relevant to the history of the West in particular, in terms of Thomas Aquinas and the Summa Theologica and the later Western Latin thinkers and their love of Aquinas, as if this could all be appropriated. Well, because he's just talking about the same thing we are, isn't he? Right? I mean, the unmoved mover, that's got to be what Exodus 3 is talking about. No, Exodus 3 is not talking about an unmoved mover, generic being thinking itself. That is not what is presented in the record of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is not like the God of the nations. He's not a force. He's not a pagan deity. In fact, he's completely different from all of those descriptions, and that's why one of the chief reasons why the religion that we hold to, we believe to be true, precisely because it's unique. It's not part of the perennial tradition. It's not part of the the pagan tradition. It's not Hellenic, right? All of those ideas, which are bound up in dialectics, bound up in Plato and Aristotle, are not the dogma and doctrine that we see explicated in Scripture and in the councils and in the fathers, for the most part. Some of the fathers were influenced and infected by Hellenism, such as Origen, right? And what happens is, over time, they get weeded out. So Origen, of course, would be the principal example of the influence of Platonism into the Christian so-called tradition. But as we said, eventually Origen is condemned, right, in the ecumenical council. So Origenism and the Origenist problematic and all of the errors that we see in Origen really can be demonstrated to be at the root of most of the early church's errors, be it Eutychianism, be it Nestorianism, be it Sabellianism, be it modalism, be it Eunomianism, be it Arianism. They all share monothelitism. They all share that same origin in the dialectical tradition, right? And the elenctic method of dialectics in Plato and Aristotle is not just a method of dialogue. It's also mirrored in the world, right? Because the world itself is supposed to present all of these dialectical tensions. For example, the monad, is in tension with the many. Friction, opposition, tension. And so therefore, underlying unities cannot be found in this position, except for what Plato tries to do with the underlying unity of all reality. He tries to boil everything back down into a monism, which is that all reality is one. And he does this by saying that differentiation is really illusory, and all particulars are sort of on their way back, especially the souls of us trapped in the body. We're on our way back to the one, and then we'll be merged back into the oneness, perhaps, maybe, we don't know, because the world seems to be eternal as well, the world of illusion and flux. So it doesn't really, there's not a whole lot of clarity as to what exactly is going to happen here or what's going on. It's more of a kind of a initiatic kind of process of just the traditional pagan ideas of cyclical, eternal matter. And then you escape it, you escape the wheel of time through whatever means, you know what I mean? It's like in Far Eastern traditions, you meditate to escape. In Pythagoreanism and Platonism, you learn math and you learn the forms, and then you die. And if you're just, you escape or something. But you also might be a transmigratory soul, right? So, you know, there's not a whole lot of coherency or consistency in these views, but as we said, many of these are worse than others. So there will be some fundamental problems in Aristotle that will make him untenable for those of us who hold to a different philosophy or a different theology ultimately, despite the insights that we do have in Aristotle. But just like Plato, right, we're going to have serious fundamental presuppositional problems that will make these systems untenable as a whole. So both Platonism and Aristotelianism, and then the later attempt at the synthesis in Neoplatonism, they're all ultimately going to fundamentally be problematic to the degree that you cannot accept them, in my view, as a whole. There are aspects that are going to be useful that will pull out, just as we saw with Plato. And if you watch the talk or listen to the talk that I did on Metaphysics or Logos and Logoi in Maximus the Confessor, and how he deals with this issue very well, very lucidly, that will all be relevant to this too, what we're going to talk about today, because we are going to talk about things like holomorphism and entelechy and energy, energeia, all of these terms that are going to be used in Aristotle that occur in other philosophy in this period. And then as well as in the church through the citations in the Septuagint and in the Greek New Testament. So a lot of that, as I said, we covered in the Logos and Logoi talk, where we looked at St. John of Damascus's two works on the Orthodox faith and his book on philosophy. So
that could be a good companion to this talk. But anyway, we're going to get into some Aristotle now here, since I've blabbed for 20 minutes about everything and nothing. So Aristotle is around, we're going to say 384 BC birth, roughly. And he was a student of Plato. Socrates died, I think, around 17 years earlier or so. And he was born in, I do have notes here, but a lot of this is going to just be extemporaneous. So things like these dates and when people were born and stuff, I've got my notes on here. Born in Stagira, his father was a physician to the king of Macedonia. At 17, his dad sent him to Plato's Academy. Most people probably have heard something or know something about this, unless you have no knowledge of this stuff at all. Right? Student of Plato, taught Alexander the Great, so forth and so on. Aristocratic upbringing-ish. Probably, I believe the same with Plato. Tutored Alexander around 342 BC. And he was not a philosophical revolutionary. He's working within the tradition that we've already seen of Democritus, of the pre-Socratics, and of Plato. These are all kind of building on each other as you move up, which we talked about somewhat in the last talk that was on philosophy, ancient philosophy and metaphysics, where we looked at some of the pre-Socratics, Democritus, Zeno, and these characters, Anaximander, the predecessors to modern Darwinian evolution, if you remember that. But Aristotle will differ from these characters. He's got a different view, and he's going to find problems in Plato, right? The third man argument with the forms, where he doesn't agree with Plato. But he's still not a revolutionary. He's still working within the confines of what would be traditional, I guess you could say, Greek schools of philosophy. He agrees and he differs. And so you often find this critique, build on, critique, build on, critique, build on. Right? This is part of the alenctic method, part of the dialectic, in a way, you could say, in the history of the Greeks. He was more of a cosmopolitan. His school will be called the Lyceum. In Aristotle's writings are many scholars think are actually lecture notes. So we don't know if Aristotle actually wrote these down to be books to be read and to be printed up in Barnes and Noble and put into the Witchcraft Wicca Metaphysics section. Next to the Dalai Lama, or if he just thought he was writing lecture notes. Now, Alexander dies in around 323, and I don't even have my when did Aristotle die? Aristotle is eternal. I guess he didn't die because I don't have it in my notes. So anyway, let's get to the philosophy. So the Milesians, if you remember, we go back to the pre-Socratics. They talked about atomism and materialism, the idea that all reality is made up solely of little bitty indivisible parts, dots, monads, Dippin' Dots, ice cream. Every reality is made up of little bitty Dippin' Dots, ice cream. And if you touch them, they will melt. Not really. Reality is made up of indivisible little dots, little monads, little atoms. But you can't see them, so we don't really know if they're there. And the irony here is that a lot of these guys were empiricists, the early pre-Socratic types, right? So how did they know this? Especially since this can't be empirically observed. If you're an empiricist, right, your philosophy is you only know what can be observed through the senses. How do you know that all reality is made up of unobservable little dots? You don't. So it's a theory that's put forward. And then what all those guys tried to do is unify their theory in a grand scheme. So it's all fire, it's all flux, it's all water, it's all. It's all aparon, beyond being, right? And all of those we saw are pretty goofy. They're pretty easy to deconstruct. And so Aristotle wants to be a little more sensible. He wants to be a little more grounded than Plato, and this is really going to be the chief distinction, is that instead of pointing up, he's pointing down. Aristotle will focus on the natural world, and in many ways, well, I guess you could call some of the Stoics or some of the pre-Socratics early, quote, scientists. That's definitely true because of their stress on empiricism. But Aristotle will more so be the first systematic thinker amongst this burgeoning scientific tradition. So from Aristotle, we're going to get, taxonomy and the classifications of species of animals and all this kind of stuff that we still use today. Aristotle will be the father of symbolic logic, right? Logical rules and laws and consistency. Now, a lot of that's all good, right? So the chief problems that somebody like myself or many even other philosophers and other traditions, chief problems that they have with Aristotle are not going to be those kinds of things, right? It's not that, this is all wrong because it's science, right? Who would be anti-science? That's just ridiculous, right? Because, it's just a tool. It'd be like being anti-screwdriver, right? I'm anti-screwdriver because I don't believe in this mythical power by which you can take one piece of metal and form it to a little plus sign cross on the end, and you can turn little screws that hold hundreds and thousands of pounds of things. Give me a break. Screws. Screwdrivers. I don't believe in any of that. Right? And that's stupid. In the same way, the scientific method is just a method. It's a tool of understanding the natural world, of figuring shit out. So the people who are so naive and propagandize as to think that what I'm talking about, or anybody who believes in metaphysics or does ontology or believes in is some form of realism or whatever in philosophy, it's not part of the nominalist tradition, right? As if this is anti-science. Okay, so this is just basic sort of philosophical discourse. But most of the people, as we know, in this kind of stuff, they're propagandized, right? The Bill Nye, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Lawrence Krauss, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, the people who are really just indoctrinated by these characters don't know like 101 philosophy, right? But they are dogmatic enough to think that they can, go on to just expound upon these matters at length. But no, in fact, one of the things I was very interested in my undergrad and in grad was philosophy of science. So I've had several science classes, astronomy and so forth. So, it's not as if biology. It's not as if I'm like not inducted into the mysteries of science and the scientific process. I spent years on this kind of stuff, and particularly the questions that we're talking about here, the questions of science and epistemology and knowledge and how the scientific method actually works. What is the scientific method for showing that the scientific method works? Well, it can't just be because it did one time, right? So this is the question of induction. So immediately you're involved in philosophical questions, whether you want to be or not. And these are the questions actually that Aristotle is going to begin to try to ask and answer. He'll ask a lot of the right questions, make a lot of the right points, show a lot of insights. But the answers are going to be insufficient. And that's what we're going to see with Aristotle. So he rejects both the materialism of the atomists and the Milesians and the idealism, the transcendent idealism of Plato. Aristotle says both of these are problematic, and he'll do a kind of presuppositional critique of these views, which are good. He'll say, Plato, what's the form of the form? How is this not an infinite regress? What are we talking about when you're saying that there is this transcendent realm of forms that is unchanging and immaterial, how is that going to relate to this world of flux and change, right? That was that question of identity over time, which we saw the four causes: the material, the efficient, the formal, and the final. We saw that those were, material, formal, efficient, final. Those were intended to solve one of these chief questions of Aristotle, which is identity over time. And this is because of the problems that would be seen in Platonic philosophy, because you've got ideal forms that are unchanging, but in this world, so the argument goes, nothing is unchanging. It's just always in flux. So how do you get these two seemingly independent realms to interrelate? Now, this is important because these are unanswerable problems on the presuppositions of these dialectical philosophies. So let's say we have the realm of the forms up here, and we're going to do a triangle, just a symbol. And so you have perfect triangle, right, in the realm of the forms, and it's like, right, God triangle. I'm not saying that this is God. I'm saying just triangles, right? And so that realm of form is unchanging, it's immaterial, it's eternal, so forth and so on. Now, supposedly, in this view, we have a pale reflection, right? Let's say down here into the crass, crude world of matter and flux. There are instantiations, triangles, little triangles here and there. Triangle man, doing the things that a triangle can. What's he like? It's not important. Triangle man, right? So there's all these instantiations within time and space, within history, of triangles. And because these are lesser, we're going to call these triangles. Keep trying, bro. Keep trying, bro. Right? You're never going to be this guy. You'll never be form of triangle. Anyway, so that's all improv. I'm here all week, by the way. Improv. So this is not a war, by the way. They're not shooting arrows at God triangle. This is not the atheist war of the little triangle people against non-existent God triangle. This is a problem. So again, this realm is unchanging and perfect. So this argument goes, the idea here is that, oh, well, perfection just means obviously stasis, right? And this is one of the stupid ideas of Greek philosophy. It's part of their dialectics that's really foolish. Stasis must mean perfect. Perfect must mean stasis. And so these things don't ever change. Therefore, that makes them the perfect things. These things are always in flux and changing. So, right. So when we draw triangles here in this world, they're always imperfect, right? We can never draw the perfect triangle up there in the realm of forms, right? So Aristotle says, Plato, there's no bridge here. This is one of your problems. How can you bridge these two completely different worlds? I mean, you're telling me that there is participation. You're telling me that these triangles participate in some way, somehow you're saying, in this one. But these are all imperfect. This is perfect. And there's supposed to be an analogy between the two, but how could there be an analogy between the imperfect and the perfect? So, what does Aristotle do just to make this all really simple? See this guy? Take him, and instead of reflections, smash him into this, smash him into this, smash him into this. Right? There's none of this. There's only these. Perfect individual substances. These formal realities, they are real forms. Aristotle is what we would call realist, in that he believes that there are essences and substances. These are not just terms, or what would be called nominalism. there really is a triangle essence, but its subsistence, its mode of being is only within time and space instances, instantiations of triangles. That's it. Every substance is an individual substance. It is never ever this, because we have no empirical basis or reason or proof or idea what this is or why we should believe in this. Right? And there's no bridge between these two because they're completely different. So, if you remember from the Plato talks, what was Plato's answer? Metaphysics, participation. Right? This realm participates in some very imperfect, very cloudy, through a glass darkly sense in these instantiations of triangles. So we're beginning to see the problems here. And again, one of the problems that Aristotle's hitting on, but giving a bad answer to, is the problem of dialectics. This realm is in dialectical tension with this realm. And since these are in dialectical tension, never the twain shall meet. Right? And you can also kind of see how you start to get those dialectical problems again of the one and the many. And the one and the many are always in dialectical tension. Right? Black and white. These are in opposition, we would say. Right? And what is the assumption in all of this? What's the presupposition that's the key to understanding this? For both Plato and Aristotle, by the way, which is going to be the real root problem. But just for the sake of argument, we're going to put that question aside for later on. Well, the root of this is the assumption that oneness or abstract unity or abstract just monism, again, most of these just collapse into monism, and that's the problem, especially when we get to Platonism and the Neoplatonists. Monism. And that's not anything to do with Tony Danza. Angela, Samantha, Mona, right? Not Monaism. Monism. All reality is one. The operating assumptions are just simply that there is a dialectical tension between one and many. And what's better than other things? Well, betterness just is stasis. Betterness is not change. Better is perfect. Better is one. And these are all presuppositions because, again, just simply on the basis of the assumption of some sort of metaphysical priority, precedence, ontological greatness that's just ascribed to this. But we don't really ever know why. It's just assumed to be so. So that's the first thing that we want to talk about. And if you remember back in the old Plato talks, that question of the one and the many was central to Plato. He thought that this was one of the clearest ways to show that the many things that are out there in the world have something that they share in common that makes them that thing and not purely particulars. And this is a form, right, or an essence. And so Aristotle is going to see the problem in placing that in a purely transcendent realm that's in dialectical tension with this realm. And what's his answer going to be? As we said, smush the transcendent realm into the here and now. And when you've done that, he thinks it's a better answer, because then we're supposedly empirically understanding and experiencing these things. But as we're going to see, it's not a better answer. In fact, it's a very problematic answer. And it's going to lead us to, I think, consider other possibilities in terms of epistemology and metaphysics and ethics. Because as you will see, these are systems of thought where they're trying to work out consistencies. And so what these philosophers and thinkers believe about the metaphysics is going to impact necessarily the epistemology. The metaphysics and the epistemology are going to impact and determine necessarily the conclusions in the ethics, and vice versa, right? They're all connected together. And again, there's a whole bunch more assumptions that we're going to look at, presuppositions that we want to look at. But this is the beginning to, I think, illustrate and show the differences and the problems that Aristotle was seeing in Platonism, and the ways that he sought to, in his mind, give a more coherent, more rational answer. I've been watching the first half of my talk on Introduction to Aristotle and Aristotelian Metaphysics. My name is Jay Dyer from Jay's Analysis, and if you would, get my book, Esoteric Hollywood, Sex, Cults, and Symbols in Film. You can get that from my site. If you'd like to hear the rest of my talks, lectures, interviews, and the entire archives on a whole breadth of topics and really fascinating discussions, many of them actually really funny too, with very prominent people, you can subscribe to Jay's Analysis for $4.95 a month or for $60 a year. And that is at the PayPal links at my site, jaysanalysis.com. So thank you for listening, watching. And again, if you want to see the full presentation, go and subscribe. You will not be disappointed.